Hello to all the listeners. My name is Auren Israel. I'm the chairman of Auren Israel, the leading international consulting firm in Israel. Auren Israel is part of an international network of offices operating in more than 70 countries and over 300 branches worldwide. As part of our podcast channel, we are excited to share with you the special podcast season, which focus on the world of life science and their business application. We will host here key people who will share with us their point of view about research, academic, application, and business in the field of science. Along with me is Mr. Amir Kahani, the managing partner of VSO Consultants Division at Auren Israel. Shalom, Amir.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here.
Great. And together with us, we are happy to host today Dr. Laurent Choppe, which will talk with us about the convergence between life science and high tech and how it's in becoming Israel's next growth engine. Good morning, Laurent.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Great having you here. A few words about Laurent, so we will get to know you. Laurent is part of the Cookerman Co Life Science since 2008 and has been involved in more than 100 medtech, biotech, and digital health corporate finance transactions and advisory assignments for Cookerman Group. Lauren, before we are getting down into the professional side, I will be happy if you can tell us briefly about your experience, your academic background, and the activity of you and your team in Cookerman Group.
With pleasure, Ophir, of course. I'm a doctor in veterinary medicine by training, born and raised in France. I have been practitioner and 15 years in the pharmaceutical industry, including 10 years in Schering-Plough, which is today Merck, the one of the largest big pharma. I worked in France, Israel, where I opened the first subsidiary of Schering-Plough, Canada, Switzerland, and after that I became general manager of a biotech focusing in the research of a drug against Alzheimer's disease in Canada and in Switzerland. And after we finished the phase 3 of this company called Neurochem, I joined the Cookerman Investment House Group exactly 12 years ago in order to develop the life science activity in Israel and abroad. My practice today is composed of 12 people doing transaction and advisory assignment in the venture-backed and middle market companies for licensing deals, M&A, merger and acquisition transactions, and fundraising. And it's in all the spectrum of the life science, which I define by biotechnology, which is drug, medtech, which is medical device, and digital health, which is all health solution based on the digital world. We have our practice is focused on Israel for about half of it, and for the rest of the clients, we are in Europe, Japan, Korea, India, China, US. We have offices in Tel Aviv, in Switzerland, in Shanghai, and in France.
Okay, great. So you are actually controlling or working with majority of the world, and obviously with everything that connecting to science and life science. So let's start with our promising title of the conversion between life science and high tech and how it will influence Israel. Amir, would you start with the first question?
Yes, first I would like to thank you, Dr. Shaw, for being us, and I'm sure that it will be a delighted conversation, and you will share your knowledge, your huge experience with our audience. And I would like to start in the first part about the Israeli and worldwide life science ecosystem. And I would like to ask you, Dr. Shop, about the ecosystem, the worldwide ecosystem, and what is the breakdown of life science companies by sectors worldwide and by stage in the Israeli market.
So today we have about 1,600 life science company in Israel. Most of them are still considered startup. About 140 new per year, which is, except the US, a real record in the world because of the prolificity and the number brought every year. In these 1,600 companies, you have about 42% focused on medical device, and it's slightly decreasing because it was the major tech life science development and up to date. One third, 33% biotech and pharma, which is a growing sector, and 25% digital health, with more than 50% growth in the last years, which is actually booming. In terms of stage, we have 10% in seed stage that are really early stage in the identification of the compound or the technology. 50% in R&D, research and development stage, which means preclinical and clinical trials. Preclinical meaning on animals and clinical meaning on human. And 38% in revenue stage, which are companies doing initial revenue for the majorities of them and gross revenue for a very small amount. It means the ecosystem is showing very young. Uh, it's a very young ecosystem all the time because of the startup
Yeah,
number.
obviously.
Okay. You mentioned couple of types, and I just wonder what, based on your experience, based on your knowledge, what among them, who will be the next star, if I may say so, between all those fields? What will be the next big wave that will capture the most profitable companies in the life science arena?
We have seen a significant number of exits in the previous years, which were almost, for most of them, in the medical device. The big one have been Mazo Robotics, Lumenis, Insight Tech, InMode. They are almost all of Nanox recently, almost all of them in the medical device, but I believe the future will be, because of the growth in the biotech, new pharmaceutical compound that could reach the type of exit like Kite Pharma or like Neuroderm, that were big example from Israel in drugs. However, the digital health is preparing big surprise because it's so applicable to many sector and subsector of the technology that I believe we can have. It's a recent sector, very new, and I will explain later how is it coming from the high tech industry into the life science, that we can have rising stars and unicorn coming from this field, and I believe they are in preparation.
No, that's quite interesting, and I think that this statistic and information about the sector would probably serve us through all out the season regarding life science in Israel. Lauren, can you maybe give us a little bit elaboration regarding the influence of the COVID-19 and the innovation ecosystem that you see around it?
Indeed, I have written a long article in Calcalist in July, in after the what we call now the first wave of the virus. At that time, we have identified 180 companies developing solutions to fight the coronavirus pandemic. Today, we counted 320 It's a growing part. And the Israeli innovation mindset and entrepreneur have developed technologies, solutions in all relevant fields of innovation. We have today a few vaccines in development, antibodies, drug, cell therapy, diagnostic, decision support, protection and prevention, remote monitoring and home care, and as well some social and mental aspect solution. So what I believe is that today Israel is proposing the most solution for the current crisis, of course, after the giant US and China that have higher and funding and higher industry base, obviously. However, uh, one of the foundation of the Israeli tech industry and life science sector is that they are fast movers, and because of that, we can have very good surprise and very good achievement in the coming months from one, or I believe more, of those 320 companies that are either developing completely new technologies or adapting their core IP, intellectual property, and their core technology to uh, fight and to target specific elements in the COVID-19 disease and in the COVID-19 needs to protect or to treat the population.
So, as you mentioned, Dr. Shop, that U.S. and China has a huge funds and a government support. So I wonder, here in Israel, as a startup nation, what is the role of government, universities, and government support in order to be able to achieve this goal to lead the market?
The role of the government, universities, and other support exists for the last 30 years and was initiated in the 90s. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this flourishing ecosystem today. And it's even more true for the COVID 19. And because this ecosystem has been able to react very quickly from the public and the private part in order to fund and tackle some problematic that are currently handled by those startups. I give you few numbers. First, from education and university, Israel can be proud to be the number one in the world in investment in education as a percentage of the GDP. The country spent 9.2% of its budget to this, and it's bringing fruit, obviously, all over and for the future generation. Israel is as well number one in number of engineers per 10,000 employees. This number is 140. It came in the beginning from the infusion of engineers from the former Soviet Union. This was true 20 years ago, but today it's coming from the university as well. And the leading academic institutions, the tech transfer organization, everyone knows the Technion, the Weizmann Institute, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv University that are very respected abroad in terms of publication and the level of the science. Second influence, and not the least, is the government support. Today, the Israel is number one in gross domestic spending on research and development. It's 4.5% of the GDP. This is extremely high compared even to US, Korea, Japan, Switzerland, which are as well big spender in research and development. The Israeli Innovation Authority has a major role in supporting young startups and entrepreneurs in the inception of their companies and even all over the life of those startups. And one element which doesn't exist in many countries is the training that some of the future entrepreneurs are receiving in the Israeli Defense Forces. The army has special program, of course, mainly in the high technology, but not only. and it helps those future entrepreneurs to train themselves in specific program with all the infrastructure of the army and the budget behind it. So we find a lot of stars of coming from some units like the 8200 unit, which become later uh, successful entrepreneurs because they have been matured and nurtured in this unit in the army. There is about 100 accelerators and incubators in Israel, 50 entrepreneurship programs, and overall, to go back to the life science, there have been in 2019 $1.5 billion invested in those companies, in the startups in life science, which means about a quarter of all investment in high tech in Israel. And for the first half of 2020, until June, 1.1 billion. It means that so far, and the trend is confirmed, we will have the number for the second half later, that the coronavirus crisis did not impact the investment in life science, and I explained why, but it's a very good news for the industry in a period which is extremely difficult in terms of employment in the country.
I would like to ask you a different question in this subject. As a leader who is well experienced in M&A, investments, and so on and so on, how and what is your assumption concerning the economic crisis, the worldwide economic crisis? What will be the influence of this crisis on the life science arena?
Okay, you obviously know that all the companies developing vaccine we have today, more than 50 vaccines in development in the world. I mentioned two, in Israel there will be maybe more. All the companies developing drug, there have been a dramatic increase of interest from all the governments and all the stock exchange as well, in the financial community, to invest in those companies. And interestingly enough, there is a huge interest back to the life science, to the biotech industry, and to the medical device, and as well to the digital health. Because of the crisis, and I believe it will last after the crisis, the biotechnology, pharmaceutical, medical device, and digital health industry have received an amazing level of interest, not only from the government, but as well from the private sector and the investment community. People are suddenly realizing that this is a core industry, not realizing, but that are realizing again that it's a core industry, that the sanitary crisis can block the whole world economy. And this sector for me today is booming, with some restriction which are coming from, and especially we see it again on the second wave now, from the fact that it's very difficult to develop product to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the same time having clinical trials and even treating patients for other diseases that are more chronic disease like diabetes, cancer, cardiology conditions, which are obviously killing many more people than the COVID-19 itself, but because it's not considered as emergency and they don't need ICU hospitalization immediately, there is kind of a competition inside the health ecosystem. And it's as well impacting the way those companies developing uh, for solution for those kind of disease to advance as fast as the company developing solutions against COVID-19. Beside this internal uh, competition inside the health system, I see that globally it will continue to grow and more money will be injected in order to find solution, and the whole life science worldwide and in Israel, the whole system will benefit, and I believe there will be an acceleration of approval of new drugs and approval of new solutions in the coming months. It has been committed by the FDA, the EMA, and all other regulatory bodies to approve faster uh, vaccines and drugs against the virus, which is obviously an international need. And I believe there will be some evolution in our market due to that. It's painful, it's very difficult to manage. We need to adapt and to adjust all the time. We are doing that with our client on a daily basis. But overall, it will boost this ecosystem, and everyone is seeing it.
Lauren, one more question regarding the ecosystem before we will move to our second chapter. As an investor, how do you measure the success percentage of uh, our life science ecosystem, innovation, R&D? How do you measure the transferment of to business activity? What is the measurement of success in your eyes?
This is a question that I'm always asked by foreign investor when they want to invest the first time in Israel. Israel is known. Israel entrepreneurs are known. Israel startup nation is known for the fact that they are extremely good in launching new ideas, starting companies, developing technologies. And from the past, it has been shown that the main thing to do after having a working idea is to sell the company, which I call the exit habit. Some other people are calling it exit chronic disease, instead of keeping the company alive and making a major player in the industry, like it is the case for Teva. Teva is the only example of a startup that was in the beginning of the 20th century becoming one of the largest employer and company in Israel. Uh, with the number of medtech industry that have exited in the US, we could have built another Medtronic and another Johnson and Johnson. The acquisition in 2018 of Mazor Robotics is another example. It was a quite big company, but again, it was acquired by a big player in the medtech industry. And I believe one thing that could happen, and many people, many funds in Israel are trying to work on that, is to keep those companies independent, becoming a real commercial and industry player, and keep them in Israel. It's a change of mindset. It could happen now. There is enough experience. There is enough good management and with strong international experience in order to do that. Maybe due to the crisis, this will happen either to develop a major player in drug development and production beside Teva, to develop a major player in the diagnostic industry or in the big data or digital health sector. But so far, the measurement of success was exit. How do you do an IPO and later on an acquisition by a big industry player, mainly US, sometimes Japanese, sometimes Chinese, but it's mainly US so far.
Oh, okay, great. I think that as a principle, we will continue encouraging exits, but also trying to encourage the manufacturing and industry here in Israel. I think that that was concluding our first part, first chapter of the podcast with Dr. Chop. And in the second part, we will continue speaking about the convergence between life science and high tech and how it's becoming Israel's next growth engine. So, thank you very much, Laurent.
Thank you.
Dear listeners, we will be happy if you will join us for more podcasts, and we will also be happy to receive from you any additional podcast ideas regarding field of interest for you. We wish you a good day. Amir Kahani and Ophir Angel from Auren Israel.